They skipped my graduation for a vacation with my sister, so I skipped telling them about the biggest day of my life, and I let the cameras do it for me. My name is Maya Bennett. I was 24 years old when this happened, and for most of my life I was the quiet daughter, the easy one, the one who never needed much. That is what my parents liked to say whenever anyone asked about me. Meanwhile, my older sister Chloe needed everything. At our dinner table, conversations always drifted toward her job stress, her plans, her disappointment. My parents leaned in close whenever she spoke, the way people lean in when they are afraid of missing something important. When I spoke, they nodded politely, eyes already drifting, waiting for me to finish so they could return to whatever mattered more. Our house looked warm from the outside. Wood, framed photos on the walls, holiday lights left up weeks too long, the smell of coffee every morning. But inside there was a quiet order that everyone understood without ever saying it out loud. Chloe was the center, and I orbited around her. Wood. When I got accepted into college, the excitement lasted maybe 5 minutes before my mother said, "That is wonderful, honey," and turned right back to asking Chloe about a trip she was planning. I paid my own tuition through scholarships and part-time work. I covered my own bills, my own rent, my own everything. Meanwhile, my parents helped Chloe with her car payments, her apartment deposit, whatever she needed whenever she needed it. When I once asked for a little help buying textbooks, my mother smiled and told me, "You are so independent, Maya. You will figure it out." Wood. I never asked again after that. By the time graduation season rolled around, I already knew exactly how the conversation would go, but some stubborn part of me still needed to hear it directly from them. So I called. My mother did not even pause before answering. Wood. She said, "We already have plans with your sister that weekend." My father chimed in that Chloe was going through a stressful time and needed them more than ever. Neither of them asked what graduating college actually meant to me. I hung up the phone and sat on the edge of my bed staring at the cap and gown hanging on my closet door. I felt that familiar sting in my chest, but underneath the sting there was something new stirring. Not sadness, not anger, clarity. Wood. I realized in that moment that I was done waiting to be chosen. I was done hoping they would finally see me. And for the first time in my life, I started wondering what it might feel like to choose myself instead. The thing about being overlooked your whole life is that eventually you stop expecting anything at all. You tell yourself it does not hurt anymore, even when it still does. You learn to swallow disappointment quietly and just keep moving forward. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. My parents missed my high school honors ceremony because Chloe had a work event that same night. When I won a small regional writing award during my sophomore year of college, my mother said she was proud for exactly one sentence before asking if I could help Chloe move apartments that weekend. Would. Every milestone in my life felt like background noise compared to whatever Chloe had going on. I worked part-time all through school, late nights stocking shelves, early mornings at a coffee counter. Would. I learned how to stretch a single paycheck across 2 weeks and decide which bills could wait a few extra days. Meanwhile, Chloe talked casually about the money our parents handed her, as if that was simply how the world worked for everyone. When she teased me about my little writing hobby, my parents laughed along, not maliciously, just comfortably, like they saw no reason to ever stop her. So when graduation finally arrived and they chose a beach resort over me, I was not surprised, but that did not make it hurt any less. It just made it painfully familiar. A few days after that phone call, I was sitting at the kitchen table in my best friend Sarah's house, helping her mother fold a mountain of warm laundry. It was one of those ordinary afternoons that somehow feel warmer than they have any right to be. The radio hummed softly from the counter. The windows were cracked open. Sarah's father walked through the kitchen and casually asked how graduation planning was going. I hesitated before answering. Then I just told them the truth, plainly, without dressing it up. There was a pause after I finished. Not the awkward kind of pause I was used to from other people, but a heavier kind. A kind that meant they were actually taking it in. Sarah's mother set the stack of towels down slowly and said, "That is not right. This is supposed to be a big day for you." Her father just shook his head like he genuinely could not believe what he had heard. They did not try to fix it. They did not offer unsolicited advice. They simply listened. And then Sarah's mother looked at me with a small, gentle smile, one kind of smiles that makes your chest ache a little in the best possible way. And she said, "We would love to be there if you want us." Those words caught me completely off guard. I had not planned on saying yes to anything that night. I had not planned on anything at all, really. But in that exact moment, something inside me shifted. I realized I had been treating my parents' absence like a rule I was obligated to obey instead of a situation I actually had the power to respond to. So I said yes. That night I sat alone in my room staring at my phone for a long time. I thought about calling my parents to explain everything, to soften the blow somehow, to make it easier for them to hear. But then I realized I did not owe anyone an explanation for choosing the people who consistently showed up for me. For the first time in my life, I was not just reacting to what happened to me. I was actively deciding my own next move. And once that particular door opened in my mind, I found I could not close it again, even if I wanted to. Once I said yes to Sarah's parents, everything around me went strangely quiet. Not peaceful exactly, more like the specific calm that settles in right before something irreversible happens. There was no dramatic confrontation, no sudden phone call where my parents changed their plans. Chloe did not notice anything different at all. Life simply continued the way it always had, with me quietly on the margins and them comfortably at the center. And for the first time ever, I stopped fighting that reality and just let it be true. What my family had no idea about was that my life had already been moving in a completely different direction. For a long time, I had been working quietly through most of college, writing late at night after my shifts ended, revising scripts and short stories between classes, taking harsh feedback and learning how to survive rejection without letting it hollow me out completely. I never talked about any of it at home because nobody ever asked, and eventually I simply stopped volunteering information to people who would only half listen to it anyway. A few weeks before graduation, my manager at the small creative studio where I had been interning pulled me aside after a long staff meeting. We stood together in a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and warm printer toner. She told me that a project I had quietly contributed to for over a year had moved forward in a much bigger way than either of us had expected. There would be a public announcement, and she asked if I would be comfortable having that announcement happen at my own graduation ceremony, in front of my entire graduating class. I remember blinking at her, caught completely off guard by the timing. Then I thought about the 2 empty seats that were supposed to belong to my parents, and I said yes, that is fine. I did not tell my family about any of this, not because I wanted to hide it from them exactly, but because it genuinely did not occur to me anymore to share good news with people who had never once made space for it before. When the school sent out the paperwork for the ceremony, I filled it out carefully, and in the section labeled family guests, I wrote down the names of the people who had asked me how I was really doing without ever needing to be prompted first. As graduation day crept closer, I expected to feel nervous, but instead I felt strangely grounded, steady in a way I had never quite felt before. I pressed the wrinkles out of my cap, laid my gown flat, and folded it carefully over the back of my desk chair the night before. When my mother texted me a photo of the ocean view from her resort balcony, I stared at the screen for a long moment before quietly flipping my phone face down. That night I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and barely recognized the person looking back at me. Not because I looked physically different, but because I felt different, lighter somehow, more solid on my own 2 feet. I realized something then that I honestly wish I had understood years earlier. Losing people who never truly showed up for you in the first place is not really a loss at all. It is a release. And as I finally turned off the lamp and climbed into bed that night, I knew that the next day was not just going to be about finishing school, but it was going to be about who actually got to stand beside me when everything I had quietly built finally became visible to the whole world. Looking back now, I can trace the exact shape of how that quiet resentment built inside me over the years. It was never one single dramatic moment. It was hundreds of tiny swans stacked on top of each other until the weight of them became impossible to ignore. It was the way my mother would ask Chloe 3 follow-up questions about her weekend while I got a simple "that is nice" and nothing more. It was the way my father remembered every detail of Chloe's coworkers, but could never quite remember the name of my college roommate, even after I mentioned her dozens of times. It was the way holiday photos always seemed to center Chloe in the middle, while I stood slightly off to the side, technically included, but somehow never quite in the frame. I used to wonder what was wrong with me, whether I was simply harder to love, whether I gave off some quiet signal that told people not to bother investing too much. It took me years of quiet reflection and honest conversations with people who actually cared to understand that the problem was never me at all. It was a pattern that existed long before I was even born. A pattern my parents had likely inherited from their own families and simply repeated without ever questioning it. Understanding that did not erase the pain, but it did something almost as valuable. It gave me permission to stop auditioning for a role I was never actually going to win. During my junior year of college, I went through a stretch of nearly 6 months where I barely slept, juggling 2 part-time jobs alongside a full course load, and my writing work late into the night. There were mornings I sat in my car in a parking lot before an early shift, just trying to find the energy to walk inside. I never once considered calling home to vent about any of it. Not because I did not want support, but because some quiet instinct in me already knew what the response would be. A polite, "that sounds hard, honey," followed almost immediately by a question about Chloe. So instead, I called Sarah. And Sarah always picked up, even at 2 in the morning. Even when she had her own exams the next day, she would stay on the phone with me. While I cried quietly in my car, not offering solutions, just staying present, just being there. That consistency taught me something my own family never managed to teach me in 24 years. That showing up is not a grand gesture reserved for big occasions. It is 1,000 small ordinary moments where someone chooses to stay instead of walking away. Graduation day arrived without any drama at all. No last-minute phone calls. No sudden change of heart from anyone. The morning light slipped through my curtains, soft and completely unbothered, like the world had no idea it was supposed to be holding its breath the way I secretly was. I got dressed slowly that morning. The fabric of the gown felt heavier on my shoulders than I expected, wide sleeves brushing against my wrists. As I adjusted the collar, my cap sat slightly crooked at first, and I laughed quietly to myself in the mirror. As I straightened it, I did not see a girl waiting anxiously to be noticed anymore. I saw someone who had simply finished something hard. When we arrived at the auditorium, the air buzzed with noise and motion. Families filled every row, hugging, laughing, snapping photos that would eventually end up framed on a shelf or forgotten in a drawer somewhere. I scanned the crowd out of pure habit, even though I already knew exactly where my parents would not be sitting. Then I spotted them. Sarah's parents waving from the family section, her mother already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Her father grinning like this was somehow his own daughter's big day too. Something warm settled deep in my chest. Not sadness, not longing, just quiet gratitude. As we lined up backstage, the lights dimmed and the music swelled. Names were called one after another, and one by one students crossed the stage. When it was finally my turn, I stepped forward with a steady heart and relaxed hands. I shook the dean's hand and accepted my diploma, smiling straight into the applause. It was loud and genuine, and for the very first time in my life, it felt like that applause was actually meant for me. I thought that moment would be the peak of the entire day. I was wrong. After the very last name had been called, the dean stepped back up to the microphone. He paused for a beat, glancing toward the wings of the stage, and then back out at the audience. Before we conclude, he said, "We have a special recognition to share from one of our industry partners." A ripple moved through the crowded room. I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept my expression perfectly neutral, eyes fixed straight ahead. A woman stepped confidently onto the stage, polished and composed. I recognized her instantly. She had been part of my professional life for well over a year now, long before my family had ever bothered to ask what I was actually doing with my time. She took the microphone and spoke clearly and calmly, the kind of voice that commands a room without ever needing to raise itself. She said, "One of your fellow graduates has contributed to a creative project that exceeded every single expectation our studio had for it." Her work became the foundation of a major production that is now moving forward. The entire room went quiet. I could physically feel people shifting in their seats around me. Then she said my name, Maya Bennett. I stood up on unsteady legs and walked back out onto the stage. The lights felt brighter and warmer, up close against my skin. She handed me a folder, my fingers tightening around it, just enough to remind myself to keep breathing. She spoke about the project in careful, rounded terms, a meaningful long-term opportunity, a significant creative partnership, a commitment that would genuinely change the direction of my career. I did not scan the crowd looking for my parents. I did not need to anymore. Then she said the next part, "We would also like to take a moment to recognize the parents who supported her throughout this entire journey." Time seemed to slow down completely. I heard a few soft murmurs ripple through the audience. She did not turn toward the two empty seats my parents would have occupied. Instead, she turned directly toward the section where Sarah's parents were sitting, and she asked, "Would you please join us up here on stage?" For one long second, they did not move at all. Sarah's mother looked around in confusion, her hand hovering near her chest. Her father leaned over and whispered something I could not quite make out. I met their eyes from the stage and simply nodded. And that was all it took. They stood up together. The walk up the center aisle felt so much longer than my own walk across that stage had. The audience watched with curious, uncertain expressions. When Sarah's parents finally reached us, Sarah's mother was already crying. Not quietly either, openly, the kind of crying that comes from being completely overwhelmed by something you never once expected to be a part of. The woman from the studio handed them an envelope and a small framed certificate. She explained it simply, "This is a token of recognition. Genuine thank you for believing in her, for consistently showing up, for simply being present when it mattered most." The details were stated once, clearly, without any unnecessary fanfare, and the room reacted instantly. Gasps rippled through the crowd, people began applauding. Some even rose to their feet. Sarah's mother covered her mouth with both hands. Her father wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders, his eyes shining under the stage lights. I stood there quietly letting it all happen, letting the truth exist out in the open for everyone to witness. When the ceremony cameras captured every second of it, the confusion slowly turning into understanding, the pride on everyone's faces that had absolutely nothing to do with shared blood, hundreds of miles away. My actual parents were watching a live stream from their resort hotel room. I know that for a fact because I checked my phone later that night. But in that exact moment, standing on that stage, I honestly was not thinking about them at all. I was thinking about every single night I had spent working alone at my desk, every bill I had quietly paid myself, every piece of good news I had swallowed because nobody at home had ever wanted to hear it, and I felt something finally settle firmly into place inside me. This, right here, this was what real support actually looked like. When the ceremony finally ended, the crowd spilled out into the warm afternoon sun. Sarah's parents hugged me tightly over and over, like they were afraid letting go would somehow make the whole moment disappear. "We are so proud of you," her mother kept repeating. "We are just so incredibly proud." I smiled and nodded and thanked people as they stopped to congratulate me. I posed for photos. I laughed for real. I finally let myself breathe. Then my phone started buzzing in my pocket. At first I ignored it completely. I did not even need to look to know exactly who it was. But it kept going, buzz after buzz after buzz without stopping. When I finally pulled it out, the screen was almost entirely covered in notifications. Missed calls stacked on missed calls. Dozens of messages layered on top of each other, some frantic, some angry, some pleading, my mother's name appearing over and over, my father's number right below it, and even my sister suddenly desperate to reach me for the first time in years. I did not open a single one of them. I simply turned the phone face down and slid it back into my pocket without another thought. We went out to dinner together afterward, the four of us at a small cozy restaurant not far from campus. Nothing fancy at all, just warm comfort food, clinking glasses, and the low easy hum of conversation. Sarah's father insisted on standing up to make a toast. Her mother kept reaching across the table every few minutes just to squeeze my hand. At one point my phone buzzed loudly again on the table, and Sarah's mother glanced over at it gently. "You do not have to answer that," she said softly. "I know," I replied. And for the first time in my life I actually meant it completely. The story of that graduation day spread much faster than I ever expected it to. Short clips from the ceremony appeared online within hours. Local coverage picked it up soon after. People shared it, commented on it, argued about it, plotted it. Some called it cruel. Others called it long overdue justice. I did not engage with any of the online chatter at all. My parents tried absolutely everything to reach me. After that, they called mutual family friends. They left messages with distant relatives. My sister Chloe even posted a long public message online about how proud she supposedly was of me and how she had always believed in me. It did not land the way she clearly hoped it would. People online remembered things. Old screenshots resurfaced. Old comments and old jokes made at my expense. Years earlier, the calls did not stop coming for weeks, but neither did my silence. A few days after graduation, my parents reached out through a distant family member, asking for a private conversation. They said there had been a misunderstanding, that they deserved to be publicly recognized too, that they were still my parents. After all, I listened patiently as the message was relayed to me secondhand. Then I simply thanked that relative and went right back to my work, because here was the plain truth they clearly did not want to accept. They were not calling because they genuinely missed me. They were calling because they missed the moment, the recognition, the spotlight, and that particular door had already closed for good. In the weeks that followed, my life did not explode into chaos the way some people online seem to expect. Instead, it quietly settled. I went back to work, meetings, revisions, long hours that somehow felt different now. Not heavier, but cleaner. The satisfying kind of tired that only comes from building something real with your own two hands. Sarah's parents checked in on me every single morning after that, not to ask for updates or details, just to genuinely ask how I was feeling that day. Sometimes I honestly did not know how to answer that question, so I would simply say, okay. And every time, that was enough for them. My parents kept trying to reach me through relatives and old family friends for a while longer. They wanted to explain themselves, to be seen, to somehow reclaim something they still believed belonged to them. I never responded to a single one of those attempts. My silence was not a punishment, it was a boundary. And eventually, slowly, the calls finally began to slow down. The messages eventually stopped altogether. Life moved steadily forward, the way it always does once you finally stop feeding the chaos with your attention. A few months after graduation, Chloe reached out to me directly for the first time since everything had happened. Not through a relative, not through a mutual friend, just a plain text message that simply said, "Can we talk?" I stared at those 4 words for a long time before deciding to respond. We met at a small coffee shop halfway between our 2 apartments. She looked smaller somehow, less certain of herself than I remembered her ever being growing up. She told me she had spent weeks replaying our childhood in her head, noticing things she had never allowed herself to notice before. before. The way she had always gotten the benefit of the doubt while I had always gotten the benefit of being convenient. She did not ask me to forgive our parents. She did not even try to defend them. She just said, "I am sorry, I never said anything when I saw it happening." I did not have a neat response ready for her. I simply told her that I appreciated her honesty and that I needed time. We still talk occasionally now, carefully, rebuilding something slowly, rather than pretending the past never happened. My parents, on the other hand, never quite managed that same honesty. Months later, I heard through a distant cousin that they had told people at a family gathering that I had simply gotten a lucky break at work and overreacted to a scheduling conflict. That framing did not surprise me at all. It fit perfectly into the story they had always told themselves, that they had done nothing wrong, that I was simply too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. I used to think hearing something like that would send me spiraling backward into old patterns of trying to explain myself, trying to prove my worth, trying to earn the acknowledgement I had spent a lifetime chasing. Instead, I just felt a quiet, settled kind of peace, because I no longer needed them to understand my side of the story in order for it to be true. What surprised me most looking back was not how calm I ultimately felt about the whole situation. It was how little guilt actually remained afterward. I had spent years of my life quietly believing that love meant simply enduring whatever you were given. That family meant unconditional tolerance no matter what. Now I finally understood something much simpler than that. Love shows up consistently, family stays present, and once you truly learn the difference between the two, you honestly never unlearn it again. Today, whenever people ask me about my family, I do not hesitate for even a second anymore. I talk openly about the people who genuinely showed up, the ones who sat proudly in that front row, the ones who chose me freely without a single condition attached. Shared blood did not make them my real family. Showing up consistently did. And if you have ever been quietly overlooked by the very people who were supposed to stand beside you no matter what, please hear this clearly. You are not wrong for finally choosing yourself. You are not cold or heartless for closing a door that kept you small for far too long. If this story felt familiar to you in any way, let me know in the comments below. And if you want more real stories like this one's about chosen family, quiet strength, and finally choosing yourself, make sure you subscribe to Hearthly Stories so you never miss the next one.